A quiet drive home takes a dangerous turn when Olivia Carter, the FBI director, is pulled over by a white cop with no cause. At first, it seems like a routine stop, until suspicion turns to hostility. A flashlight in her face, a baseless accusation, and then his hand moves toward his gun. But what he doesn't realize, the woman he's threatening isn't just any black woman. She's the one person who could destroy his career in an instant. It was a long day at the office. Olivia Carter, director of the FBI, had spent hours in back-to-back meetings, reviewing intelligence reports and handling a high-profile case. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she finally felt a sense of relief. The day's chaos was behind her. The smooth hum of her black Chevrolet Tahoe filled the quiet road as she drove home. The sky had turned dark, the last shades of orange fading into the deep blue of the evening. Streetlights flickered at a steady rhythm, casting long shadows across the pavement. She exhaled, a hand loosening the first button on her crisp white blouse as she looked forward to an evening of peace. A home-cooked meal, a glass of wine, and maybe an hour of reading before bed. Simple pleasures that felt like a luxury after the week she'd had. The streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional passing car. It was a rare moment of solitude, a moment she had earned. Then, out of nowhere, the sharp flash of red and blue police lights filled her rearview mirror. Her hands instinctively tightened around the wheel as her eyes flicked to the speedometer. Exactly the limit. She had used her turn signals properly. No stop signs had been missed. Her brows furrowed. Why am I being pulled over? She cast a quick glance at her side mirror, watching the patrol car behind her. The sirens weren't on full blast, but the silent message was clear. Pull over. Olivia knew better than to second-guess it. Her foot eased off the gas as she guided her SUV smoothly to the side of the road, muscle memory taking over. Her mind, however, was already racing. A black woman, alone, being stopped by the police at night. The weight of that reality settled over her like a thick blanket. She had seen too many headlines, too many stories that started just like this, but didn't always end well. She swallowed hard, her jaw clenching slightly. She wasn't just any black woman, though. She was the director of the FBI. If this was an ordinary traffic stop, it would be resolved in seconds. And yet, deep inside, she knew this could go sideways fast. With a steady breath, Olivia turned on her headlights, making sure the entire area was illuminated. It was a habit, ingrained after years of experience. If anything happened, visibility could mean survival. Slowly, she reached over to the dashboard and activated her phone's recording function, mounting it securely in place. Not because she expected trouble, but because she understood reality. Her fingers tightened around the wheel. She kept her hands visible, her posture upright and calm. Alert, but not afraid. The flashing lights behind her pulsed against the darkness. She didn't know what would happen next, but something in her gut told her this was not going to be a routine stop. The glow of the police car's flashing lights bounced off the side mirrors, illuminating the interior of Olivia's SUV in a rhythmic, pulsating glare. Through the rearview mirror, she saw him approaching, a broad-shouldered, middle-aged white cop with a stiff posture and an air of rigid authority. Officer Rick Thompson. His expression was already set, a look of suspicion, control, and quiet hostility. His boots crunched against the pavement as he walked up to the driver's side, one hand resting near his holstered gun. Not in an outright threat, but in a way that sent a clear message. He was in charge here. When he reached the window, he didn't greet her. No good evening, ma'am. No explanation. Just a sharp knock on the glass, curt and commanding. Olivia exhaled slowly. Then, with a controlled movement, she reached for the window controls and rolled it down. Officer Thompson's voice was clipped, devoid of politeness. License and registration. No preamble, no reasoning, just a demand. Olivia didn't flinch. She had been in far more intense situations than this. She had questioned war criminals, dismantled terror plots, taken down syndicates. She could handle one arrogant cop. She reached for the glove compartment, her movements slow, deliberate. At the same time, her gaze remained locked on Thompson, watching him as much as he was watching her. "Sure," she said smoothly, "but can you tell me why I was stopped?" Her voice carried no aggression, just quiet authority. A firm, steady confidence. Thompson shrugged, unfazed. You look suspicious. Olivia's brow furrowed. There it was. Not a speeding violation. Not a broken taillight. Just suspicion. She kept her face unreadable, but internally, she felt her disdain settle in like a cold weight. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. It was about power. Thompson's stance shifted slightly, his feet planting wider, as if preparing for confrontation. He expected resistance. Olivia, however, was collected, composed, unshaken. She tilted her head, studying him. Then, with precise articulation, she said, "Look suspicious? That's not a legal reason for a stop." Her words were even, controlled, but they carried weight. A direct challenge. A refusal to submit to baseless authority. Thompson's jaw tensed. He didn't like that. Not one bit. The night air felt heavier now. The tension, thick as smoke, wrapped around the two like an invisible battle line. Officer Thompson's jaw tightened as Olivia's words hung in the air. A direct challenge. A refusal to submit. His fingers curled around the heavy-duty flashlight strapped to his belt, and in one swift motion, he snatched it up and shined it directly into Olivia's face. The blinding beam cut through the darkness, forcing her to squint as her vision momentarily blurred. "Are you carrying drugs? Weapons?" Thompson's voice was sharper now, edged with accusation. "People like you are always up to something." There it was. The words were predictable, expected even. Olivia's hands tightened on the wheel, but she willed herself to stay composed. Years of experience told her exactly what was happening. He was pushing her, provoking her, trying to force a reaction, but she wouldn't give him one. She inhaled through her nose, steadied herself. Then, with calculated control, she responded, "No, officer. And I'd appreciate if you'd stop making false accusations." Her voice was measured, not defensive, not confrontational, just undeniably firm. Thompson's nostrils flared. The control he thought he had over the situation was slipping through his fingers like sand, and he didn't like that. His free hand slammed down on the car door with a sudden, forceful bang, the sound reverberating in the quiet night. Olivia didn't even flinch. "Don't argue with the police," he barked, his voice rising. "Just do what I say." She met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "I need a legitimate reason for this stop before I comply." A muscle ticked in Thompson's jaw. His patience was gone. His right hand dropped to his hip, unclipped his holster. Olivia saw in real time the shift in his stance, the slight movement of his fingers curling around the handle, the unmistakable click of a firearm being loosened from its place. And just like that, in a single heartbeat, the situation had gone from harassment to life-threatening. The world seemed to slow down. The tension crackled like electricity in the night air, pressing in on Olivia from all sides. She watched, her breath measured, her mind razor-sharp, as Officer Thompson's fingers curled around the grip of his firearm. Then he drew it, a glint of metal, the cold steel of his gun, now raised and aimed directly at her. "Get out of the car. Now!" Thompson barked, his voice thick with rage and adrenaline. The sight of the barrel, a weapon now fully trained on her, made Olivia's pulse thunder against her ribs. She didn't move, couldn't move, not because she was afraid, but because she knew, with absolute certainty, that any sudden movement could be misinterpreted as a threat. She had seen this play out before. The headlines, the videos, the officers claiming they felt threatened. A wrong move could mean the difference between living or becoming another name in the news. Slowly, with controlled precision, Olivia raised both hands, ensuring they were clearly visible in the dim light. Her voice was steady, unwavering. "Officer, I am recording this entire interaction." She tilted her chin, just slightly, gesturing toward the phone mounted on her dashboard. The screen was lit up, live streaming. The red recording dot blinked, capturing everything. Thompson's grip on his weapon tightened. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Olivia's next move had to be deliberate. With agonizing slowness, she moved one hand, not toward the door, not toward the glove box, toward her phone. She could feel Thompson watching her like a predator, his gun still raised. But she wasn't stopping. Her fingers grazed the phone screen, dialing a number she knew by heart. She lifted the phone to her ear, her voice calm, but carrying unmistakable authority. "This is Olivia Carter, FBI director. I'm being unlawfully detained at gunpoint." For a fraction of a second, the world froze. Thompson's face shifted, a crack in his confidence. He hadn't expected that. His posture stiffened, his knuckles white against the grip of his gun. But then, instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I don't care if you work for the FBI," he snapped, his voice now teetering between panic and stubborn arrogance. His gun didn't lower. "You're not above the law." The air around them felt suffocating. The entire world hung in the balance. The air was thick with tension, Olivia's pulse steady but alert. Officer Thompson's gun was still aimed at her, his knuckles white against the grip. Then, the distant sound of approaching sirens. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the road, cutting through the darkness as two more squad cars screeched to a stop behind Thompson's vehicle. The doors swung open. Out stepped Police Chief Daniel Harris, a grizzled officer in his 50s with a reputation for order and discipline. His sharp eyes immediately scanned the scene, taking in the sight of a lone woman in an SUV, hands raised, and Thompson, gun drawn, face twisted in stubborn arrogance. Harris's expression darkened. "Thompson, what the hell is going on here?" His voice carried the weight of a man who had seen it all, but had no patience for stupidity. Thompson flinched, glancing toward his superior. For the first time, hesitation crept into his stance. Olivia remained silent, still unmoving, still watching. Harris took a few steps closer, his brow furrowing as he got a clearer look at the woman in the driver's seat. Then, recognition dawned in his face. His eyes widened, his mouth parted slightly, realization hitting him like a freight train. He knew exactly who she was. His tone changed instantly, shifting from frustration to pure disbelief. "Do you have any idea who this is?" Thompson's face went pale. The grip on his gun loosened slightly, confusion flashing in his eyes. His gaze flickered between Harris and Olivia, his mind scrambling to process what was happening. He stammered, his arrogance suddenly faltering. Harris's expression hardened. The chief's voice dropped, low and cutting. "You just pointed a gun at the FBI director, you moron." Thompson visibly stiffened. The color drained from his face, realization crashing down on him like a tidal wave. He had screwed up, badly. His mouth opened, desperate for an excuse for some way out. I didn't know. She wasn't cooperating. Harris wasn't having it. "Lower your weapon." His voice was deadly cold, leaving no room for argument. For a brief second, Thompson hesitated, his pride warring with his survival instincts. Then, with a jerky motion, he lowered his gun, his hands slightly shaking. But it was already too late. The damage was done, and nothing he said now could save him. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Olivia lowered her hand slowly, her heart still steady, but her mind sharp. She reached for her dashboard-mounted phone, stopping the recording with a simple tap. Everything had been documented. Officer Thompson's face was a shade of disbelief and panic. He knew what was coming. Chief Harris let out a slow, heavy breath, his disgust evident as he turned to Olivia. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Olivia nodded, but her eyes never left Thompson. "I have everything on video," she stated, her voice calm, yet lethal. Then, with complete control, she held out her phone to the chief. "This man abused his authority. He pulled a gun on a citizen without cause. I expect immediate action." Harris didn't hesitate. He knew there was no saving Thompson now. He turned toward his officers. "Arrest him." Thompson stumbled back, shaking his head in disbelief. Wait, no, you can't do this." But the moment his fellow officers stepped forward, reality hit him like a brick wall. One officer grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back, while another yanked his gun from his holster. Click. The unmistakable sound of handcuffs locking into place. For the first time that night, fear overtook his arrogance. "You can't arrest me. I was just doing my job." She was resisting, but nobody was listening anymore. His own colleagues remained silent, their faces unreadable. The squad car door swung open, and with one final push, Thompson was shoved inside. A disgraced officer, a broken man, and the entire world was about to find out why. By morning, the footage was everywhere. Every major news station played the shocking video. an FBI director being unlawfully detained at gunpoint. Social media erupted in outrage. Hashtags trended instantly. Protests broke out across the city. National headlines flashed across every screen. The pressure was immense. The department knew there was no sweeping this under the rug. And the case against Rick Thompson moved faster than any police trial in recent history. 2 weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, government officials. Everyone wanted to witness the moment justice was served. Thompson sat at the defense table, his posture rigid, his once proud shoulders now slumped. His lawyer tried to spin the situation. It was all a misunderstanding. Officer Thompson was simply following protocol, but the video footage proved otherwise. Every word, every threat, every moment of abuse of power. And then came the final blow. Olivia Carter took the witness stand, her presence commanding, yet calm. The courtroom fell silent as she spoke. "Unchecked power leads to injustice," she said, her voice unwavering. "If officers like Rick Thompson are allowed to continue operating with impunity, the very system meant to protect us becomes a tool of oppression." She let her words settle, her gaze sweeping across the jury. And that cannot be tolerated. The closing arguments were swift. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. And when they returned, the verdict was read aloud. Guilty of abuse of authority, of racial discrimination, of reckless endangerment, and his sentence? 4 years in federal prison. As Thompson was led away in handcuffs, his expression was blank, void of the arrogance he once carried. The same way he had shoved Olivia into fear that night, he now walked into a future he never saw coming. And Olivia Carter? She stood tall, unshaken, because justice had been served. The courtroom had fallen silent long ago, but its echoes rippled across the country. The case of Officer Rick Thompson versus justice was no longer just about one unlawful stop. It was about every unlawful stop. It was about every abuse of power. And it was about ensuring it never happened again. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath of the trial sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies nationwide. Departments across the country came under scrutiny. New policies were introduced, mandating body cameras for all officers, strict protocols for traffic stops, and intensive training on racial bias and de-escalation tactics. For the first time in a long time, real conversations were happening. Conversations that weren't just brushed aside, because the world had seen the video. They had heard the words, and they had witnessed what happens when power is left unchecked. This was no longer just Olivia Carter's fight. It belonged to everyone. Standing at the podium of a national press conference, Olivia Carter looked out at the hundreds of cameras flashing in her direction. The eyes of the nation were on her. She adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and then spoke. This was never just about punishing one officer, she began, her voice clear and resolute. This is about ensuring real justice. The room hung onto her every word. We cannot build a fair society if those sworn to protect us abuse their power. She let that sink in. Accountability is not an attack on law enforcement. It is a necessary safeguard to uphold its integrity. She shifted slightly, scanning the room, before delivering her final words. If justice is only for some, then it is justice for no one. And I refuse to accept that. A wave of applause erupted. Not the kind of applause for a speech well delivered. The kind that came from people who believed in change. And Olivia Carter knew this was bigger than her. In the final image, a single frame captured the contrast of two fates. On one side, Officer Rick Thompson, in handcuffs, being led away. His head hung low, the weight of his decisions crushing down on him. On the other side, Olivia Carter, standing tall, steady, unbroken, knowing she hadn't just fought for herself. She had fought for something greater. This story isn't just a story. It's a reflection of reality. How many times has justice been denied? How many times have people in power abused their authority? How many times have those with no voice been silenced? The fight for justice isn't about choosing sides. It's about choosing what's right. If we want real change, we have to demand it. Because if power is left unchecked, we all pay the price. If you believe in justice, accountability, and fairness, stand up for it. Share the story. Keep the conversation alive. Because real change starts with you. Loudspeaker like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Because tomorrow, we'll have another story worth telling.